Greetings, everyone. I'm Kharyshi Wiginton. I'm the Special Projects Manager for the Center for Third World Organizing, C2, and we are members of the Whole Communities Project. And I have the honor today to interview one of my good friends, community family member, people, Greg Hodge. I'm going to let you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then we'll get into the questions, okay?
Okay. Hey, Kharyshi. It's good to see you. Good to be on this with you. My name is Greg Hodge. I am the son of Bobby and David Hodge from Pine Bluff, Arkansas. I have 5 children. I'm West Oakland resident. I garden. For my work life, I've been an attorney, a minister. I work with the Brotherhood of Elders Network currently as the chief executive officer. We're an intergenerational network of African descent men trying to improve our community and create thriving, flourishing environments for, especially for African American men and boys. Um, I am also politically active. I've been a member of the school board, run for office a few times, and so people will come to me often and ask me about the political process. And people getting ready to run for office for the first time. I'm sort of like a lot of people's informal coach around all this. So yeah, really excited to talk about liberatory leadership. And yeah.
Perfect. Yes, you are also one of my coaches. Um, so yeah, we're talking about liberatory leadership, and one of the things that I sit with when I think about liberatory leadership is how do we be the humans today that are deserving of the world we want tomorrow, right? I think that, you know, um, if we say we've been swimming, everybody's swimming in the junk, then we don't, in my mind's eye, you don't get achieve liberation and then start to do the work to change, right? Because what'll happen is you'll take all the junk with you. So like how do we start to do that shedding and transformation today, so that when we get that world that we seek to create, that we are ready for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great question. When I think about especially those of us who are holding leadership, and I mean both positional leaders, people in informal leadership, the auntie on the block who is the block mama, are leaders. We're all leaders. The mayor's a leader, that sister on the block in West Oakland is a leader, right? And I just think that that leadership, and this is a definition that I like from it's either Mary McLeod Bethune or Dorothy Height, which is one and the same because Dorothy Height was a mentee of Mary McLeod Bethune, but one of them said that leadership is the capacity to respond to the situation of the moment.
Mm,
And I think that the moment that we're in right now, globally, here in the US, here in Oakland, is a moment that requires a progressive kind of leadership. And I want to say, I don't think of progressive leadership as just having a progressive policy agenda. Like progressive leadership, to be a leader and to model what we need means having like healthy, thriving relationships with that are principle driven, principles of respect or dignity or integrity, all those things requires us that's what this moment requires. And so I think that the way that I think about being a progressive, like a lot of times people are focused just on political progressivism, but I think that some of that is like, and what we miss often is the opportunity to engage around the healing that we need, this vision of like how do we want to be for the world that's coming?
mm,
Or how do we want to model it for younger people who will definitely inherit all of this situation. And so I think that notion of moving humanity forward is
mhm.
part of that progressive stance. And I think that we owe it to both ourselves and to others, to be able to model that. So I think about the example of snakes that basically exist and then they shed their skin, they
Mhm.
shed their entire exoskeleton or their skin to be ready for the new thing. And your current state skin
Mhm.
and way of being, using that metaphor, requires you to be willing to change. Like, as my understanding, I'm not a herpetologist, but I understand enough about snakes to know that it's a struggle. Like, they don't come out of that skin easily. And
Mm,
so they have to struggle with it. Just like, caterpillars in a cocoon have to struggle to get out, or how chicks break through, that there is a certain part of resilience that is based on that struggle.
mhm,
Because if you can't get out of that, you don't continue to exist.
mm, mm,
Right. And so I think that, as human beings, and especially human beings in these bodies that have been racialized, like the bodies that, we know that racism is a social construct, but it's as real as anything because it has an impact on how we move in this society. So anyway, I think that there's a way of us getting, of modeling, not even getting ready, but staying ready, because
mm.
we got folks that say, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready.
Ready.
And so, but staying ready in a liberatory stance,
Mhm,
like knowing what the world is that we're, even knowing definitionally what's the world that we want to see. Because sometimes we, especially social justice activists, we're really caught up in what we don't want. We're really caught up in like what we say no to. We don't want Prop 187 in California, but we don't want, this or that. But basically, when you ask people, well, what is it that what you do want? Like, what's your vision for the future? It's a refreshing question,
mm.
because a lot of times people haven't really thought about, well, what is the world that I want to see? So,
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It's so interesting when you were talking about when you're talking about the snakes, and I never thought about what it would take to move through that, to shed that skin, right? Um, but they say that, so when I think about genetic memory, I think about like our family members passing down the generational uh
mhm.
pain and junk. But recently, my friend Nikita was saying that she learned that what happens is that your mom's body is actually preparing you for the environment that she's in, right? So it's not just that she's passing down her emotions, but that her body is physically preparing you to deal with what the circumstances are around her, right? So if that means that on a cellular level, you are shaped to inherit all of to cope with all the junk, right? So what do you have to do to change yourself on a cellular level to be able to exist in a different environment? And I think when I think about it in those terms, I'm like, yeah, like there has to be some deep transformation, which even if it's emotional, is not easy. Even if it's emotional,
Mhm.
like that's some of the hardest. People would rather do anything often than have to actually transform themselves to such a degree. But we are really going to have to do that to get that world that we want to live in.
Yeah, no, I think that you're onto it, and I think that we're learning more and more about the science of our bodies, and the both the art and the science of living. And I think that the more information we have about how things work at the cellular level, that we're essentially recycling ourselves on a regular basis. Every few days we have new cell makeup, and
Mhm,
I think that this idea that you put out on the table around transformation, because is important, because I think that it's sort of like transformation through adaptation. Like, we have to adapt, and adapting is not a bad thing, right? It's like, if you have to adapt to a new physical environment, if you
mhm,
have to adapt to a new emotional environment, adapt to a new intellectual environment, a new political environment, that is sharpening your muscles, it's sharpening your chops
mhm,
for how adaptation happens. And if we look at examples out of nature, like nature is constantly adapting, and in the larger sense, and we're, as human beings, part of nature. And
mhm,
so I think that this idea that things don't stay static, like things have to change. Like, there's species that are adapting all the time to be able to live in a more, let's say, a more hostile or less hospitable environment. And so, and I think that like this notion of how we adapt. I like the examples of mycelial networks where, if there's this underground network of fungi that make up the largest living organisms. The largest one is in Oregon, where it's like tens of thousands of square miles,
Mm-hmm.
where the mycelial operating as mushrooms and fungus, but they feed the forest. They adapt to whenever there's a fire in the forest, energy and resources and nutrients go to the place that needs to be repaired. And
Mm-hmm.
then when it's fixed, it finds itself to another space. And so the like in the forest, what we can't see is a bigger network of life than what we can see.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think that somewhere in terms of that notion of how we learn from nature, like I'm fascinated by the science of biomimicry, where you're essentially patterning, human construction or human ideas for design based on something out of nature. And I just think that it's one of the more fascinating. Like I feel like our ancestors really understood that,
Mm-hmm.
like how they built houses, how they danced it out with the Dogon and Mali, how they, like we have so much wisdom to tap into
Mm-hmm.
intergenerationally. And I think that the big project really is around intergenerational transfer of wisdom, like how, and not facts, but wisdom, like the combination of how experience and facts leads to better choices and decision making, is one way to think about wisdom. So yeah, I agree with you that transformational process and through adaptation, through the sort of energy around resilience helps us so not just survive but thrive in new settings, which goes to the question you asked about, like, what does it mean to get us ready for the world that we're anticipating.
Yeah, 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 you're right. Keeping along that idea, when you think about imagination, I mean, when you imagine what liberation looks like, feels like, tastes like, what would that be?
For me, it is a world where everybody's, and I mean everybody, like everybody's value is enhanced, rewarded, honored, that each human being can be themselves, like,
Mm-hmm.
and be your whole complete self without apology, without a struggle, and so that the world could actually, the human enterprise could benefit from everybody to
Mm-hmm.
be able to move forward, and even the people who we perceive as not good people, or as Ifa says, the people who don't allow the good to come into the lives of others, like even those folks. I just read something recently that is kind of instructive, because it was the story is told of in the Hindu tradition around, a man who was a robber came to a spiritual man for a blessing for his work. And the spiritual man said, well, I'm gonna give you a blessing, but what do you do for your work? Oh, I'm a robber. I rob people. And he gave him a blessing. He goes out, he prospers in that robbing enterprise. He comes back to the holy man and says, like, thank you for the blessing. I need you to bless me up again. And then the holy man says, well, I want you to add a couple of people to your team, to your gang, so you can be even more successful as a robber. So he
Mm-hmm.
does that and he goes out. He comes back. He says, like, that really worked out well. Then he says, well, add 20 people to it, because now and then he does that and comes back. And then the holy man basically says to him, well, what I really want you to do now is, we have oppressors who have inhabited our nation, who have taken us over. I want you to go and displace them, get them out of power, because now you're in a position to have a certain amount of power, right? So the pivot of, like, how you go from robbing people to being a liberator for your nation, the person who you didn't think could be ever contribute something
Mm-hmm.
positive to the situation now becomes someone who actually has a place in that society, right? It's an extreme example of what I think we ought to be trying to work toward, is like to make sure that even somebody, and I hate to say this, even somebody like the orange one has a role. The
Yeah.
fact that that press conference he or that conference he did with the three sisters, and for him to say the things he said about Kamala Harris and the things, all of that's useful because that energizes
Where inspiration comes from.
people people on the other side to be like, you know what, we're not going to let you get back in power.
Hmm.
Everything we can to make sure that you're not in that role again,
Hmm.
right? And while we elevate and lift up somebody who some of us don't agree with everything that Vice President Harris has ever done, but that's okay because whatever she was doing all these years as a prosecutor in the DA's office, the Attorney General, a senator, vice president for 3.5 years has gotten her ready for this moment. And
Yeah.
so for people who want to go back to what she was doing 25 years ago, I'm like, that's really not a fair question. What is she doing in the last couple of years? Like, what has she learned? How has she grown as a human being to be for this moment when, in my opinion, she's a black woman, and how black women unfortunately always have to do is to clean up other people's messes.
The cleanup woman.
The cleanup woman. It's a mess. It's a
Mm,
mess. And so now, and it's funny because when I think about the stereotypical images of black women and the Aunt Jemima, thing with a do-rag and and all that, I learned some recently a couple years ago about even that image. She was doing undercover work because Aunt Jemima, the house woman, the one in the kitchen, knew all the information about what was happening in the big house all the time
mhm,
and how she used that information to make sure when she heard the conversation going on, like we need to lynch, so and so for saying what he said. She gets to say, "Bruh, you need to get off the plantation tonight." Like, like that role, or even when I went to Brazil a few years ago, there's a historian that we got a chance to meet with who talked about when Nzinga was fighting the Portuguese in Angola for 40 years. One
mhm,
of the things that she did was she allowed her and ordered some of her best troops to
mhm,
allow them to be captured into the slave trade
mm,
so that they could then give the people in the Quilombos, these independent communities, give them more information about how to fight the Portuguese. He
mhm.
was an expert at fight. So a lot of people would look at that going like, well, wait a minute, you allowed your people to get caught up in the slave trade? Yeah, for a purpose.
It's like the spook who sat by the door.
It's like the spook who sat by the door. So anyway, I just think that historic role of bringing things back into balance. It goes all of our most ancient mythology around Isis and Osiris, you
Mm,
know, or I said, and that whole story of like how she, pushed back against her husband and brother's murder, pulls the pieces back together of his body, and basically move the nation forward. That story, that allegory,
yes.
is instructive because this country has never lived up to what it's supposed to be. And so I think about Shirley Chisholm in that regard. I think about Barbara Jordan, who was from Texas, in that regard. When I was inspired as a 11, 12-year-old when Barbara Jordan spoke when she was part of the Watergate hearings, basically trying to determine what they were going to do with Richard Nixon.
Mhm.
And, and to hear her say that this country has never lived up to its aspiration,
Yeah.
like never lived up to what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I think the quote is something like, "I want a constitution as good as its promise," or
Yeah.
something like that. But that historic role that African American women have played, and
Mm.
now we get to see if Kamala gets to step into that role and what she may do that looks like liberation.
All
If
right.
nothing else, we have a much better avenue and channel to talk to her than we did with this other boy.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I completely agree. Um, when you I, I want to shift gears a little bit.
Sure.
Where do you feel most at home? Why do you feel most at home there? And how's that changed over time?
That is such a great question because I feel like it's like the question that Dorothy got asked in The Wiz. you know, and then, you get to sing like, home is where, and for me, home has changed over time. Like I felt at home in Arkansas because I grew up in a really loving household. I didn't deal with the what the world was saying about Black people. I think I had a hedge around me, so to speak. I was able to be in my space in my family's house, and feel safe and secure and whole. So, but then I started, like, as a college student, I went to Africa for the first time, got a chance to go to Kenya, and had this amazing experience where a woman who I met through her grandson basically said to me, like, you made my life complete, because once she figured out where I was from, and she said, oh, well, you're one of the ones that my grandmother told me that when they went away, and she gave me something to take to my mom, a gift that of a Kenya, a woven basket and a blanket, crocheted blanket. And she said, take this to your mother, who is my Kikuyu sister. She's my sister. And then she held my hand and she said, and she put her hand next to my hand and she said, same. The only English words that she could say to me was, she said, same, same.
Mm,
That was a moment I started feeling at home on the African continent. Like,
mhm,
I was feeling like, and every trip I've had since then, and I've been to Africa probably 15 times.
mhm,
And every time I go, I see something new. I
mhm.
feel more at home there. I feel like every time I have a divination, people tell me, in those readings that, you were destined to become a Babalawo. I feel
Mm,
like sometimes I feel like I was born at the wrong time and place, but then I have to remember that great philosopher, songwriter, Stevie Wonder, who said God knew exactly where he wanted you to be placed.
that's right.
Like that, so I feel at home on the African continent. I feel at home in West Oakland. I feel at home in, my backyard. I feel at home in this family house that I've, maintained over the years for my children and a bunch of their friends. And we've had some everybody living over here. And so and it's funny because I asked, I got to be friends with Alice Walker like 15, 20 years ago. And I asked her once, I said, well, where do you consider home?
Mhm,
And she said something really profound. She said, I don't think about it like that. I have nests. I have a nest in Mendocino. I have a nest in Oakland. I have a nest in Mexico. I have a nest in New York. Wherever it is that she is, that
mhm,
nest, she gets to metaphorically hang the sign out that says home. So
mm. Yeah, I like that. I like that. Why is it important for us to seek liberation in everything that we do?
I think that, liberatory life is a practice. It is not a destination. It's
Hmm.
it's a thing that we have to constantly be thinking about, seeking out. It's where we find our purpose.
Hmm.
You know, like, our reason for being on the planet is about living a liberated, free existence. And
Hmm.
I just think that, that freedom can get expressed in a lot of different ways, politically, in terms of music, in terms of dance, in terms of literature, in terms of visual arts. I think that capacity to seek after the next thing, which is good, is part of the human experience. I mean, I think if we don't have a purpose, we don't have a reason for living. Almost everybody we know, Dr. King said it, if a man, a woman doesn't have something to fight for, them, they don't have a reason for living, in so many words. But I think that um, capacity to dream a new world. I mean, what Langston Hughes said, we dream a world,
Hmm.
and I think that, our poets, our writers, our authors, like our futurists, are always sort of pushing us to think about, well, what is the, Octavia Butler's work, like, to think about, like, what is the next world, what's possible in the next world. And I think that is what I think for especially the older you get, the more you sort of think about, have I lived my purpose? Have I done what I was supposed to do on the planet and not just simply take up space and, air and food and, shelter. I think that sense of having a purpose that is aligned with liberation is a powerful reason to keep going.
I agree. I agree. What does family mean to you? And then who feels like family and what about them feels like family?
I think family is like that, it's connected in some ways to home. I think that broader definition of home, those nests that Alice Walker talks about. I mean, I think the family are the people who love you and you love them enough to struggle around like how you are in this moment. Like
Mhm,
I'm a different person now than I was when I was 24 years old when I had my first kid.
mhm,
So so like my family has to, I hope, accept me for who I am at 64 years old.
mhm.
So I think that your family are the people again that you work to support when they are going through both the good times and the not so good times. Your family are the people who rally around you when you have a material, physical, or spiritual need. Um, you don't always. I joke about this. You don't have to like your family, but
Mhm,
you do have to love your family.
mhm.
And I joke about this sometimes. Like there were moments where I really love my kids. And then sometimes I was just like, I love them, but I do not like them.
Not like them. Ooh,
Depending on
especially.
what was happening in a particular moment. I'm like, y'all better be glad I love y'all. Because like is not gonna last too long. And so I have circled around. I think I like my children again. Um, and so for me, that's the first level of family. But then I think about the broader circle of community as family.
Mhm.
Is that it's like, and sometimes you come from a biological family that they don't like or love you. And so you have to make new family. Like you have to, and sometimes those new families get made in the crucible of serious challenge.
Yeah.
And one of the things I learned in Brazil was that in Brazil, there was a certain connectivity between people who survived the Middle Passage
Hmm.
and they essentially set them because the communications were different than here in North America. So you could kind of stay in touch with people who you might have come here with. The
Hmm.
first 200 years of the trade of enslaved Africans in Brazil was almost all from Angola. And so and then they moved to Nigeria and the Jeje and that, but for those first years, and so one of the things we learned through the historians and other academics was that people who came together actually they were like a fraternity or sorority. They stayed together.
Hmm.
They would have annual gatherings that
Hmm.
people would get together because their biological families they had lost, but these became your new family members.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a powerful thing. And I don't know how much that happened in North America, if that dynamic, I haven't ever read any research about like did that happen here? But and maybe some of it was around common language, like you could talk to people that you were enslaved with. Anyway, I just think that piece and the family was the basis that family, whether it was your biological family or otherwise, that was the family that also you were in these quilombos with, these freedom places, which there's a whole bunch that we can learn from Brazil because, we think about quilombos as like up in the mountains and it was hard to get to, and the Portuguese were having trouble militarily getting up there. But what
Hmm.
I learned was that there were at least 1,000 quilombos.
Oh,
And
wow.
some of the quilombos were literally just outside the town limit. So you would make it to a quilombo sometimes for just the weekend.
Hmm.
This is a fascinating thing. Like we always have had that energy of like, look, I can't be here. I can't do this job. I got to go. But some of them were like, I'm just going for the weekend. And plantation owners would look the other way because they felt like you do need a break and you do need you might have some mild punishment when you got back, but there was an understanding that, that there was a need for people to socialize. There was a need for people to be human, like to play this out. And so yeah, for me, family is that broader community. I feel like I have a family here in Oakland that I've
Mhm.
been part of over the last, 40 years, where I get to know people, I get to say to people, and I think I'm, reasonably well respected person. So when I run into people, they're not cussing me out. Like, so and if they are cussing me out, it's in their head. They say it's my face. So I just feel like
Yeah.
there's that sense of community. And then finally, as the more we evolve, we think about the entirety of the human family. Like, how am I family with everybody on the planet, whether I know you or not? And if my concern for you is such that if I'm in North America, here in the US, and we're dealing with climate change because people living in coastal areas and on islands are already seeing sea rise, already are seeing things they can't do, or wildfires that are happening, more regularly every year, or tremendous tropical storms turning into hurricanes at level 5. All of that, it makes my my sort of center of concern broader.
Mhm.
It's like I'm hoping that as I'm evolving as a person, as I'm evolving as what I like to call myself as a Pan-African humanist,
Mhm.
like how I'm evolving, I want to be able to be family with everybody everywhere I go.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a certain orientation. The one story I share with you is that when I was the first time I went to Kenya, as soon as I got off the bus, I was traveling with the urban geography field study from Northwestern University, 28 people, two of us were African American, everybody else was white. The bus pulls up to the very first hotel that we stayed. This is after long flights and all that. And there was a group of men sitting, like it was around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They were sitting having a beer at the in the patio area of this hotel. So I get off the bus. They were looking and they were like watching all these white folks get off. And then I got off the bus and they were like, come over. Like, bro, come over. Like, we ain't seen this before.
Mhm.
And the first inclination I had was, yeah, what y'all trying to take from me? Because I was directly coming from Chicago, and you be on swivel in Chicago in a certain way, and I was just like, oh, y'all about to run some game on me, blah 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 blah. But once I went over to these brothers and sat down and talked, and they were like, why were you hesitating? Like, I was like, well, I thought maybe y'all was, trying to get my money and something. They were like, they started laughing. They were like, we don't treat visitors like that. Like,
Mhm.
we don't treat, especially you as a black man, we're looking at you like black people don't never come to Kenya.
Mhm.
Like, we see white folks from Europe all the time. We see the Germans, we see the Italians, we don't see anybody that even remotely looks like us. And
Mhm.
we want to know, we got questions for you. Like, what's it like in the US right now? Like, how are you and your family doing?
What's the news?
What's the news of the day? It's like Habari Ghani for real.
Mhm.
Like, so that was like, so I've had experiences where I've had to let the skin shed,
Yes.
where I've had to let people, be themselves. And basically, my default is I trust you implicitly until you show me there's a reason for me not to trust you.
Yes.
That's opposite of where I was when I was in my youth, where I was like, I don't trust you unless I know you. I don't trust you until you earn it. It's much easier to flip it and be like, I trust everybody until you show me that you're not worthy of trust. So yeah, so I just think that my I'm trying my best at this stage of my life to expand my family circle to be all human beings.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I think it's like the wisdom that you talked about earlier is that what I do is I trust me now. And so
Mm,
know is that regardless of what is thrown at me, I know how to handle myself. I know how to protect myself. I know
hmm
my intuition is strong. My discernment is strong, right? So So
Yep.
I'm much better today of keeping myself out of situations and people who don't mean me well.
Mm,
But then if you show me, if I've let you in and then you show me differently, then I know how to exit you out, right?
yeah. Yeah. No, that's right.
I think it's kind of what you were talking about, but can you speak to a central value, idea, or community at the core of your work?
A central value. I think value is probably the easiest word for me to talk about it. No, I think my value is this now valley concept of Ma'at,
Mhm,
of truth, justice, right order, reciprocity, harmony, and balance, and righteousness being like the way that I'm trying to move in the world.
mhm,
And I think that the way that our ancient ancestors talked about it and used it was that it was the basic concept for organizing the universe.
mhm,
And therefore the macrocosm plays to the microcosm, sort of as above, so below. Like that idea that humanity is organized around this central idea of honesty and truthfulness, that is organized around putting things into their proper place and perspective, that is organized around giving and receiving in equal measure. This idea of reciprocity, like that sense of value is what I'm looking for in my family, in my broader community, and in humanity writ large. So for
mhm.
me, it's like I spent a lot of time thinking about that idea, trying to figure out ways to make that idea come to life, um, ways that it plays out in my relationship with my children, with my, my romantic partner, with, like with everybody. I'm trying my best to live into that principle and breathe into that principle and not just have it be words.
Is there something like, is there something that you do that helps you operationalize that to make it not just words?
Yeah, I think one example is I am constantly trying to improve my meditation practice,
Mm, mhm,
um, so that my meditation takes a lot of different forms. So for me, sitting still quietly, having a mantra is a meditation,
mm,
but so is playing drums. Like if you're doing a repetitive thing with a rhythm
mhm,
that puts you into a certain trance state, not quite trance, because one of my teachers a long time ago said, well, if the musician's going to trance, who is here to keep the dancers in, to hold space for the dancers?
mhm.
So musicians don't get to be in trance the way a dancer does,
Yeah.
but it's approaching it, right? Because like I noticed something like when I was probably in the mid 90s when we were doing a lot of stuff with the Bantaba Dance Ensemble. We were having regular rehearsals a couple times a week. We were playing for classes, we were playing for festivals like Festival at the Lake and the San Francisco Ethnic Dance Festival and all that. And what I noticed about it was that whenever like everything is like locked up, locked in, and it aligns,
Mhm,
that there's a emergent sound that is present. It is greater than the sum of the parts.
mhm,
So in the Jolly, in the Jalliah culture, djembes, dunum, kinkini, songba, that set of three different bass drums. You've got djembes that are first accompaniment, they're playing. Some djembes are bass djembes, so you learn like what the orchestra is, right?
mhm,
And then when you put all of those pieces together, when everything is like really like locked in, and if you add movement to it, dancers, then there's this other sound
mhm,
happens, and it feels like a universal sound.
mhm.
It feels like it's like a water, 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 water. It's like, and I don't know how you write that down for this interview. I don't, I don't know how that sound will make it into this, but it's that. And then similar to like science around quantum physics, the minute you look for it, the minute you try to focus in on it, it goes away.
Mhm.
It's just like in quantum physics when they say that if you observe a subatomic particle through a telescope or any or electron microscope, et cetera, like it moves. It is no longer in the place where you thought it was, right? So that's that dynamic of being able to hear the emergent thing, like
Mhm.
or feel the emergent thing without focusing on that thing is part of how like all these, in my opinion, how all these sort of connections get made. So that if it's a seated meditation, if it's a meditation that happens in a drum dance situation,
Mhm.
if it's in my garden, like I like when now that the weather's gotten nice in Oakland, I do a lot of yard work and I like to cut my own grass and I'm gardening. I'm like growing tomatoes and radishes and cucumbers and and so doing something repetitive around picking up a bag of dirt and putting that into the yard and like I lose myself in that.
Mhm.
And that feels like that principle of my in terms of balance, like that's the thing that brings me back to a certain sense of balance. It's really hard for me to be mad if I've just come out of my garden. Like it's just it's counter it's fully counter to that idea of putting your hands in the soil and being able to do it's like all of the things that with the research that came out with the that made the film blue zones,
Mhm.
like all of that, the health of gardening, regular walking, being able to eat healthy food, being able to um, grieve properly, being able to be in social settings that make you laugh. Like all of those things make people live a much longer time. And I think living for a long time is a certain balance to it. It's a certain right order to it. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, I definitely feel that. Uh, I remember going through the rites of passage at the African American Women on Tour conference that it was in San Diego one year. I was in high school and we had what do you like a processional at the end,
Mm,
dancing through the streets, and I remember being exhausted emotionally and physically. And but it was one of those things where I couldn't keep going and I couldn't stop. That it
mhm.
literally was kind of like, but it was like being completely centered in spirit because that was the thing that was carrying me um
Mhm.
along. And so when you talked about that noise, and then it makes you think that like that's an example of being completely present. Like when we say present, like because if you're trying, then you're no longer in alignment, right? Which is why it then dissipates. But it's like because you have to be able to experience.
That's right. That's right.
I just have two more questions. Um, the second to the last one is, what are you committed to making happen in the world, and how does your sense of home influence that?
I think the thing that I am committed to is making space and giving opportunity for younger people to lead.
Mm,
Like what I want to see is like I want to work myself out of a role
mhm,
um by excuse me by training younger folks.
mhm,
And I think that the examples that I've given you over in terms of where I think home is and what my nest is and all that, I think that this is my still in Oakland, in West Oakland. This is still my base of operation, so to speak.
mhm,
And I want younger people to see and hear and feel. So whenever I have somebody in my home, I
mhm,
want them to feel welcomed. I want them to feel safe. I want them to feel like we don't have bullshit arguments at this house.
mhm,
Like I there was a moment where one of my children's partners wasn't speaking to one of my other children, and they were both living here. And I was like, y'all got to squash that
Mhm.
because you're not gonna be in my house. And this is why I started sounding like my daddy. Like you can't be in my house with that shit. Like y'all got to make up, or one of y'all got to move or something. But you can't be here and not be saying like civil, like basic civility. So I just think that the thing I want to create and offer to younger leaders is are examples. Like a good example is like one of my mentors, so Arnold Perkins. When I was like maybe 15, 20 years ago, when I first really got to started getting to know him, he would call on holidays.
Mhm.
He would remember he would call me. Like, and I know he's a busy person, and I wasn't like, tight with him at that point, but he would call me and say, Merry Christmas or Happy New Year's or whatever the day was. And I thought to myself, I was like, why is this busy man? Because he's super busy, got a
Mhm.
lot of things going on. He got his own family. Like, why is he taking time to say something, call me? And I know that he was doing that with other people too. So it has made me more considerate for younger people. So when I hear about something going on with somebody, like I got a friend whose mom is really about to make her transition, and I wasn't aware of it until this week, and I called him.
Mhm.
Like simple things that like you know, like I was talking to another friend just this morning about and I was complimenting him on his daughter, who, even when she was a little kid, she was always very um, courteous and very interesting. He was like, "Oh yeah, we raised her in a kind of old school way." And so one of the things she does when somebody does something nice for her, we have her write a thank you note, not
Mhm.
an email, not a text, but a handwritten note and that is an old school kind of way of being. But I think about all of the notes that I have around my house where somebody wrote me a card or maybe thanked me for something I did or just wrote an inspirational quote. That's like it's really, kind of important. So I just think that there's yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you. All right, that's perfect. It kind of folds into this last question, which is in times of overwhelming grief, conflict, and stress, what tools do you use to recenter and come back home to yourself? So you talked about how you did, like how you handled the young people living in your house, right? But what do you do when those things are impacting you? How do you come back home to yourself?
I think I do like I try to be gentle with myself.
Mhm.
And I try to give myself the time and the space to actually grieve and not try to rush it.
Mhm.
Because it's not, grief is not, didn't show up on a schedule. Like, and I actually said this to, I guess I can share this. I said this to the mayor when her mom died about a month ago, month and a half ago. And she was just saying, like, sometimes I just feel like crying. And I was like, you need to cry no matter what's going on. Like you need to step to the side and cry. If that's because, and I learned that from when my dad passed away. So my yesterday was the 32nd anniversary of my dad's passing. First of all, I can't believe it was 32 years ago. I was just like, that's crazy.
Mhm.
And my dad died very suddenly.
Mhm.
I had taken my family to see him because he had some surgery that was kind of unrelated to why his cause of death. But he had a sudden heart attack, and I had been with him that morning. I have a picture of him like having breakfast, at the breakfast table, and we were in Pine Bluff. We were going to Atlanta. He let me borrow his car, drive to Atlanta. We got to Atlanta with with my whole immediate family. And then we weren't in the house for like an hour, and my mom called and said, Your dad died. And I was like, What? And so it was very sudden. And then we drove back to Arkansas. So for the next year, I was like, I couldn't talk about my dad. Like I couldn't say anything without getting choked up about my
Mhm.
father, right?
Mhm.
And so part of what happened was, and I know that part of the reason that happened was because I was so concerned with my mom, my little sister, like trying to take care of other people. So
Mhm.
one of the practices is like I've gotten accustomed to the idea that when something bad happens, when something traumatic happens, I have to take care of myself as much as I'm trying to take care of other people.
Yeah.
And so I had and the only thing that really, one of the things that really shifted all of that was I had a dream about my father. So part of it is listening to the dreams. And in that dream, there was the image of my dad. It was like my favorite picture of him come to life. There were
Mm-hmm.
no words, because dreams are, they don't require words.
Mm-hmm.
It's really often it's about a sensation or a feeling. And the feeling and sensation was my dad essentially communicated to me, I'm okay. I'm in a
Mm-hmm.
good place. Like you need to move on with your life and not hold me like over here in this, this purgatory somewhere between here and the other side.
Yeah.
So I think that just an awareness of myself in terms of like how I process. I think each person has to figure out how they process pain and disappointment and trauma
Mm-hmm.
and be able to have their own strategies for it. I think it's a very personal thing. And like I said, the older I get, the more loss that I experience, with friends passing away or friends having very serious, issues around their health, that kind of thing. And so and the last thing I'll say about it is, I think one of my mechanisms for dealing with all of this is like really, really, really appreciating every single day,
Yeah.
like seeing every day as an opportunity to do good, to be well, to share with somebody, and I think that if we all could do more of that, then it sounds a little cliche-ish, but the world would be a better place because, if I handle my stuff and then you handling your stuff, that's two of us handling our stuff, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and there's a sort of multiplier effect of all of that. So yeah.
Oh, you're right. I was getting chills when you were talking because it's been my this is going to be the 13th anniversary, 13th year of my mother's passing. And similarly, my mother was always sick, but we would joke and say that her heart was like the only organ in her body that was healthy. And unexpectedly, um, she was in a hospital, but she was like, "Oh, they're releasing me in the morning." And then I go out. I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna talk to you later." I go out, and then I get a call that she had multiple heart attacks. And they were
Oh my.
like, if you can get here, you need to get here because we don't know that she'll live another 24 hours.
Mm,
And the huge blessing for me was that I had just got a scholarship to the Black Choreographers Festival, and I was able to do a fellowship with them, right? And I had this whole other choreography piece in mind, but the only thing I was swimming in grief. The only thing I could do was about my mother, but that forced me to actually like move through it, and I would still have these lingering, because it's such a thing like you're tracking your life by this person, right, who has brought you in, and I was still I was still going through my grieving process, and then she came to the only time she's come to me in a dream, and it was a similar thing of kind of like she was okay, and,
hmm
and there was such a resolve. I've never felt the same. Then I was able to start developing a relationship with her in spirit, but it
mm,
was really because of what happened transpired in that dream. And if I don't think if I would have been forced to work through it through the creative process, eventually it would have happened, but I think it was able to happen so much quicker because
hmm
I had to actually walk through the grief
yeah,
instead of avoid it. So
yeah, yeah. It's thank you for sharing that. And I feel like we all have those moments that we process. Like I said, we process them differently and the way that we need to.
mhm,
Like you did it through choreography.
mhm,
I might have done it through dream. And you reminded me of something else about it too, because my oldest child, when my dad died, she was like, let's see, she might have been about 8 or 9.
mhm,
And one of the things that she said, and this is under the theme of follow your own teachings.
Mhm.
So she was like, so Baba, you've been talking about ancestors and we see you pouring libations and you're doing all this, and you've been telling us for years that, the ancestors are here spiritually. So Grandpa David didn't really die. He just became an ancestor, right? So
You got you the test.
I was like, preach. Because this is, your children,
Mhm.
whether they're your biological children or your familial kids or whoever, your nieces, nephews, whoever you got in your life, will remind you of what you said.
Yep.
If they've been listening, they will remind you. And sometimes that's all you need is you. I had no comeback other than you're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
What do they say? Energy is neither created nor destroyed, just transformed. So
Just transform. Just transform.
thank you so much for this interview. When we started talking about it, I was like, oh, like, and I don't think that you've ever said, like, I've never heard you call yourself a liberatory leader, but to me, it's infused in how you live your life and the things you know that I know about you and things you don't know that I know about you, right? It's in how people, it's the news of you, right? It's how people talk of you. It's how you're moving when you don't know people are watching, but that I see. And I just feel like it's very consistent. It's not because the cameras are present or people are watching. It's really because you are an example of somebody who is living their values or are always striving to live their values. And I just appreciate you for being a part of my community. And I was like, oh, we definitely got to get my brother
Well,
on.
Well, you're very welcome. I'm glad that you are part of my community as well. You have been a really important part of my daughter's life. You were doing all that work all those years over at McClymonds. You was in the trenches over at Mac.
Say that. Say that.
Alternatives in action was alternatively acting. It's like, yeah.
Say word.
So, yeah, but no, I appreciate you. I appreciate your current iteration of what you're doing, and I'm always a pleasure to talk to you. So
Like,
thank you.
enjoy your week. Enjoy your travels.
Hmm?
I said, enjoy your travels. Have fun.
Oh, thank you.
With
Oh,
the family.
I got a few things to do before I get out of here, but I definitely I work hard and play hard.
All
So
right. All
yeah.
right. Take care.
All right, bye.